slide would have shown you the actual record for Claude and Judith's marriage, which looks, again, unreadable, but can with patience be read. Claude's father and Judith's mother had both previously died. So Claude's widowed mother, Marie, this is a bit difficult to follow, and Judith's widowed father, Etienne, decided to marry each other. Yes, on the same day as the marriage of Claude and Judith. And presumably as part of the same ceremony. As all of this is recorded... Oh, yes, that's it. As all of this is recorded in the one entry in the church records. So Claude's father-in-law was also his stepfather, and Judith's mother-in-law was also her stepmother. I think that might be unique in world history, but I can't prove it. Claude and Judith ultimately had 8 children that I know of, only 2 of whom are relevant to this story, so I'll skip details. In 1676 or 77, the family moved about 25 kilometres southwest to the area of Marchenoir, which was on the previous map I'd shown you. Why I think they moved won't be discussed here. But from Marchenoir church records, we can note exactly where they lived. The hamlet of Le Ramage, near St Leonard-on-Beauce, a kilometre west of Marchenoir, alongside the wood. And if we can get it, here is a postcard picture. Obviously not from 1677, it's from the early 1900s. It was here on March 1683 that Claude and Judith's 4th child, Philippe, my direct ancestor, was born. At this point, a bit of general history is necessary because trouble for the family, as for all French Huguenot families, was brewing. Assuming the audience here knows all about the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, I'll be brief. Despite the Protestant religion being legal and to a degree tolerated since 1598, persecution was growing. In 1681, with over 700,000 Huguenots living in France, a policy of the French government called the Dragonnades was introduced. And next slide for that one. I think we've seen that picture before. I think Robert used it in his previous talk. Their job was to intimidate or terrorise Huguenot families into converting to Catholicism. This involved billeting dragoons or soldiers in Protestant households with implied permission to abuse or harass or intimidate the family members until they converted or abjured. The Dragonnades spread across France, reaching the Beauce region by October 1685, and culminating in the revocation or withdrawal of the privileges granted by the Edict of Nantes in October 1685. Among other things, it forbade public Protestant worship, ordered the destruction of all Reformed churches, forbade Protestant schools, and forbade Huguenots to leave France. The Religion Réformée was now termed Religion Prétendue Réformée, meaning so-called or alleged Reformed religion by the authorities. Just to comment on the picture to the right there, it's a poster from the time, sure and on displays to bring heretics back to the Catholic faith. And if you look closely at the symbolism, you've got gallows up there in the top left-hand corner, you've got some sort of whip or birch down below, you've got the wheel down near the bottom, and breaking people on the wheel was a particularly cruel thing to do. Fire there, you've got galleys in the background, a prison over here, and the fellow in black giving more gentle persuasion, I suppose. How did all of this affect the Renaud family? Firstly, it saw the end of their church at Marchenoir. In September 1685, the church records ceased, and in October, the church was demolished. As described in one source, quote, in the month of October of the same year, the Lieutenant General Civil and the King's Attorney from the Bailiff's Office and the head office of the Court of Justice of Blois came to Marchenoir and had carried out under their eyes the demolition of the Temple of the Protestants in execution of the edict. There's no picture of that, but, next slide, this illustration may be similar. This is an engraving of the demolition of the Temple de Charenton, which was the big Protestant temple to the west of Paris, to the east of Paris. It's an engraving done by Sébastien Leclerc, who was actually engraver to King Louis XIV. So this is meant to be not sympathetic to the Huguenots, it's meant to be the opposite. you can see that the symbolism at the top is supposed to be religion trampling heresy, meaning the Huguenots underfoot. So, you know, perhaps the demolition of Protestant temples looked something like that. What could Claude and Judith do now? It appears they moved almost immediately to Sougy, a small town northwest of Orléans, where a son Jacques was born soon after, though there's no record of the birth or baptism, perhaps understandable under these circumstances. On the 4th of December 1685, just 6 weeks after the revocation, Claude and his wife Judith Louise, accompanied by their 3 children, abjured, renounced their Protestant faith and converted to Catholicism. This occurred at the 12th century Catholic parish church of Saint-Germain at Sougy, near Orléans. And here is the record. The text on the left and the translation on the right. So like many others, including other members of their own family, for which I have records, they abjured. Why did they do this, and to what extent was it voluntary or under compulsion? I don't know, but as they later left France and settled in a remote part of Brandenburg, Prussia, we can be fairly sure that their abjurations were unwilling, perhaps just necessary at the time to survive. I note too that they had 3 children, aged 7, 2 and 1 to 2 months. That makes it hard to do anything else. Anyway, for the next 4.5 years at least, Claude and Judith appear to have lived as part of the parish at Saint-Germain, and 3 more children were born there, all recorded in the parish registers, the last baptised in May 1690. This is the last record I have for Claude, Judith and family in France. At some point afterwards they must have decided to leave, either as one family group or separately, and to resume their Protestant life in another country. Why did they leave? Apart from the general desire to flee persecution, I don't know. There was probably some encouragement and inspiration from other family members and neighbours who are recorded as having left as early as 1686. Perhaps they had always intended to leave when the children were old enough. When did they leave? Where did they go? And what route did they take? All I know for certain is that they ended up in what is today Germany sometime before 1710. Next slide. In terms of where they might have chosen to go, these were the options in general. Most Huguenots went to the Netherlands. The next group down, England, and I'll lump Ireland in with England, although probably the Irish wouldn't like that. About 45,000 there. The German states come in 3rd, Switzerland 4th, and then all of the other countries down there. I was surprised that South Africa was so small. A lot of Huguenots went there, but I think the answer is that most of those who went to South Africa probably went to the Netherlands first, stayed there for some time before going to South Africa, so they probably counted in the Netherlands numbers. Going across to the right hand, of the German states, Brandenburg, Prussia accepted most Huguenots, and then the various other German states down, as you can see. Those figures are probably a little bit conservative from the particular source I took them from. If you add it up, it comes to about 160,000. I tend to read about 200,000 as the accepted figure. In fact, the next slide shows, in general terms, the routes, the various routes that the Huguenots would take. And if you look at those figures on that one, they're actually reasonably higher than the previous slide. Now, where are we up to here? Yeah, next slide. Yes. Okay. Now, I'm not spending the next half an hour explaining this. I tried to find a simple map of Germany in 1685. And there's no such thing as a simple map of Germany in 1685. I'm not spending the next half an hour explaining this map, but Germany was made up of about 300 sovereign independent states at that time. There were archbishoprics, bishoprics, counties, duchies, electorates, landgraviates, margraviates and principalities. And I'm not going to define what all of those sorts of things were. Most, but not all of whom, were part of a confederation called the Holy Roman Empire. Complicated, but I want to focus on this bit here. Just one more click. That'll do it. Yep. This bit here, the Margravia, also known as the electorate of Brandenburg. And the tiny bit that's just poking in on the right there, the Duchy of Prussia. Just another click, I think. Looking at the enlarged picture of that area, we see the three key places for my story: Berlin, Angermünde, Prenzlau. I'll mention those later on. And in this area here, just one more click, this area here, circled, is known as the Uckermark. And that's the area where the descendants of my original ancestors stayed for probably the next 160 years. It's about as far away from France as you can get in that direction without going further into Danish, Swedish and Russian lands, which some Huguenots did. So why go there? Well, we need to understand the politics of the time, and it all starts with a powerful dynasty called the Hohenzollerns. We've all heard of the houses of Bourbon, Habsburg, Medici, Romanov, Tudor, Stuart and many others, but I'm introducing and summarising the Hohenzollerns in this one slide. The two areas we're concerned with are the Margraviate or Electorate of Brandenburg and the Duchy of Prussia. In 1415, the House of Hohenzollern gained control of Brandenburg. A couple of hundred years later, in 1618, they gained control also of the Duchy of Prussia. In effect, they merged the two so that history calls the state Brandenburg-Prussia from 1618 onwards. In 1701, the elector at the time decided to upgrade his status to that of a king. Okay, he's not happy to just be an elector, I want to be a king. So he declared, he changed the name of Brandenburg-Prussia to the Kingdom in Prussia, so that he could call himself king. And it's interesting there that the name of the kingdom is actually Prussia, but if you look at the two halves, Brandenburg was the bigger, more powerful centre of the whole place. Prussia was the little bit way off to the east. And yet the name Prussia comes down to history as the name of the state. You'd think logically it should have been the Kingdom of Brandenburg, because that was really the heart of the place. But Prussia comes down. In 1772, it goes from the Kingdom in Prussia to the Kingdom of Prussia. I'm not going to explain the technicality there. There was a technical, and someone will ask me that question at the end, I'm sure, and I'll try and explain. But the Kingdom of Prussia basically existed till 1918, the end of World War I. In 1871, however, it became part of the German Reich. In fact, it was an expansion of Prussia that led to the creation of Germany in 1871. The name Prussia was abolished in 1947 after World War II, and in fact no geographical area of Germany today is called Prussia. It's a no-no word, I think because of its military associations. Now, next slide. In 1685, the Hohenzollern ruler was Frederick William, or more correctly, Friedrich Wilhelm. A predecessor of his, the Elector John Sigismund, had converted from Lutheranism to Calvinism in 1613, making Calvinism the religion of the family and of the Hohenzollern court, though the general population remained strongly Lutheran and resisted early attempts to convert them to the Calvinist faith. This is a simple background to Frederick William's response to the revocation in 1685 and the flood of Huguenot refugees. To quote from the preamble to his edict, "Out of the righteous sympathy which we must in justice feel toward our co-religionists, who are oppressed and assailed for the sake of the Holy Gospel and its pure doctrine, we now have been moved graciously to offer them a secure and free refuge in all our lands and provinces." Frederick William was undoubtedly strongly influenced in this by Jacques Abadie, minister of the French Church in Berlin. He had been brought from France by the elector in about 1680 to occupy that position. So what was this Edict of Potsdam? Next. The Edict von Potsdam was issued on the 29th of October or the 8th of November, depending on which calendar you use. I wonder if anyone knows what I'm referring to, which calendar you use. The Julian and the Gregorian? Yes, yes. While France and other Catholic countries had switched from the old Julian to the new Gregorian calendar in 1582, Brandenburg didn't adopt that calendar till 1700. So the dates between France and Brandenburg are at that time 10 or 11 days different. Trivia perhaps, but maybe important for the timing of events. For our purposes, it means that the Edict of Potsdam was issued about 2.5 weeks after the revocation was registered in the Parlement of Paris. Now that seems to be like a fairly quick response, as if Frederick William knew what was coming, or at least was prepared for the opportunity. What did the edict actually say? Well, it was a very practical document, providing specific processes. It had a preamble and 14 articles, and was issued in both German and French, as you can see here. Next slide. The German text on the left and the French text on the right. There was also a shortened French version, which was smuggled into France and secretly distributed. Next slide is basically a summary of what the edict said. Look, very quickly, the preamble welcomed the Huguenots. Articles 1 and 2 told you specifically how to get to Brandenburg, Prussia, from wherever you were. Article 3 said you were free to choose where to live, but certain towns were recommended. Article 4, property that you brought with you was exempt from taxes and customs duties. 5, you got houses and building materials free and no tax for 6 years. 7, vacant farms and farming materials for free and no tax for 10 years. 7, free admission to the same rights as native Germans. 8 and 9, financial assistance to set up manufacturing businesses or agricultural businesses. 10, judicial independence for French reformed communities. Article 11 said the French could have their own pastors and conduct services in French. 12, special privileges for French nobles. Article 13, all of the above is retrospective, except it doesn't apply to Catholics. And Article 14, the government officials were strongly urged to give special care in applying all of this. So was all of this just to do with religious sympathy? No, it wasn't. Frederick William was ambitious in a political, military and commercial sense. He aimed to transform the small but growing remote state of Brandenburg, Prussia into a great power. One particular problem was that the effects of the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, had not been fully overcome. 1/3 of the population had died due to war, famine and plague. Huge areas were badly depopulated. The elector needed people to rebuild his war-ravaged territories, and here, leaving France, were a huge number of people with all the right technical, industrial and agricultural skills to help do this. So this all looks very inviting, but before we head off there, a small aside. The Edict of Potsdam was not the first invitation by a German ruler to French Huguenots. In April 1685, 6 months before the revocation, Charles, or Karl, Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, issued his Freiheit concession, or freedom concession, resulting in about 4,000 Huguenots settling there. And another aside is that in 1699, those Huguenots founded the small town of Syburg, later called Charles's Haven, or in German, Karlshaven. Much later, as a spa town, it took the prefix Bad. And today, Bad Karlshaven is the headquarters of the German Huguenot Society with its museum and research facilities. Next slide. Now, how do you get to Brandenburg, Prussia, given that the revocation forbade Huguenots to leave? And from my perspective, how might my own ancestors have got there? Excellent. I'm going to show you an interesting resource here and do a little exercise, which some of you may be able to do on your own. It's code BAS in the handouts you've got. Now, it's the Base de Données du Refuge Huguenot. It's online, you can find it on the internet. You can see from the top right-hand bit, you can switch it into English, which brings up the Refuge Huguenot database. Now, basically, it's a database of a large number of records of assistance given to Huguenots at various places on their journey between where they left in France and where they arrived, and gives all sorts of details about the people recorded. Now, as an example, I've done a search myself, and for the next slide, thanks. An example of a record that I found. I searched for the surname Renault, and I combined it with Marchenoir, the little village from which they came. I didn't find my direct ancestors, but I found this fellow, Paul Renaud, who undoubtedly is some sort of distant relative of mine, with that surname and coming from that small town. The record says at the top, assistance at Frankfurt-sur-le-Main in 1686. So it's a record of assistance given to him at that place. The date, 19th of March 1686. The amount of money he got was 24 florins. I think florins was the currency at the time there. Pour les 20 is for 20 people, so it seems as if he was part of a group of 20 people who were given 24 florins assistance. His destination was Hollande, the Dutch Republic. Comment on why he's there. Tous exiles et réfugiés à cause de la persécution. All exiles and refugees because of the persecution. Next 3 lines are 3 places where he stopped on the way. Schaffhaus, Neuville, Bern, all in Switzerland. Next couple of lines, where he came from, the synodal province of Orléans-Berry, the province of Orléans, and the town of Marchenois, and his name at the bottom there. So there's interesting information there. If we just transfer this information to a map, and Gerald, yep, there's a blank map of the whole area. Down the left-hand side there, I've got the names of those places that were mentioned in that record. If we now put them onto the map and join them up, and the next click will do that, I hope, we can see the places there, and creatively joined with the red line. Starting at Marchenois, he appears to have gone down to the Swiss border opposite Geneva, up through Switzerland through the established route, then followed the Rhine River from number 4 all the way up to 5, Frankfurt am Main, got his 24 florins there, back to the Rhine River and down the Rhine, ending up in probably Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So from that record, you've been able to plot his probable route. Now, if he had decided to go further on to Brandenburg, Prussia, and I don't know whether he did or not, then the next click will show the route he would have taken. And that comes from Article 1 of the Edict of Potsdam, where it describes the fact that at Amsterdam shipping was provided, blah, 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 and you went up to Hamburg and down the Elbe River and that. So that's how he might have, how he may have got to Brandenburg, Prussia. Now, from other evidence I have, which I won't present here, it seems very possible that my ancestors went to Brandenburg, Prussia via Switzerland and the Dutch Republic, making this the likely route that they took. But there are other possibilities. Back to our blank map. If they decided to follow a more direct route, such as the one suggested in Article 2 of the Edict, this may have been the route. One more click. We'll bring it up. Okay, head straight up to the French border at Sedan, across to Metz, up to Frankfurt, down the Rhine River to either Cologne, the first dot, or Clèves, the second dot. Clèves was actually Prussian, Brandenburg Prussian territory there, and then without even going into the Netherlands, you could go straight across to Berlin. But there's another way as well. If they decided to head directly to the Dutch Republic via the Spanish Netherlands, which would seem to me the most dangerous route, Huguenots would not be welcome in the Spanish Netherlands, then there was an established route from Senlis, north of Paris, to Amsterdam, shown here at the next click. The blue dots. But however my ancestors got to Germany, the next question is when, and that's equally problematic. They were definitely still in France in May 1690, and at least Philippe was in Germany by June 1710. While there is evidence for relatives of my family being in Berlin and London in 1692, I currently don't think my direct ancestors actually arrived till after 1699. The main evidence being the following. This is called the Colonial List from 1699, General List of French refugees in the States of His Most Serene Highness, Elector of Brandenburg, as they were at the 31st of December 1699. This was published in 1888 and is supposed to be a complete list of all French colonists in Brandenburg, Prussia at that time. and counts 13,847 people, not including those in military service. By the way, the full text can be accessed online. It's BER on your handouts code. Claude, Judith, Louise, Philippe and Jacques are not on this list, so I can only conclude that they weren't yet in Germany. But, at the same time, an Isaac Renaud, cousin of my Claude, who married in Berlin in April 1692, is also not listed here where I think he should be. So it is possible that the list is not complete anyway. This line of research is to be continued. At this point I want to go back a bit and explain how I first discovered that my Renaud ancestors, clearly from Germany, were actually, prior to that, of Huguenot descent. Next slide. Reading some general history was the first step, and coming across the people called Huguenots, of whom I was only vaguely aware at the time. Suspecting a possible connection, I searched the internet and discovered in about March 2012 the Huguenot Museum, Archives and Library of the French Church in Berlin, in German Französische zu Berlin. The archives were and still are not available or searchable online, so I wrote a letter. Yes, they had no email address at that time, but I was able to fax the letter, and you can remember fax machines. I sent it to Mr. Robert Violet. You just do another click, see where I got his name from. He's the person I had to apply to. About 6 weeks later, I received a reply in the post. But before showing you that, here on the next slide is the French church in Berlin today. Just to explain, I believe that the small building on the left-hand side was the original Huguenot Temple de Friedrichstadt, built 1705 by the Huguenots themselves. In 1785, the big structure was added on, that is known as the French Cathedral, or Französische Dom, and they were actually joined together by them in the middle, so it's all the one building complex. 200 years after the Temple was first built, it was extensively redesigned in 1905, and then during the course of World War II it was largely destroyed by bombing, and then rebuilt in 1978 to 1983. So that's roughly as it is today. Now, next one, the reply. It came in the post about 6 weeks later, as I said, and this was the covering letter here, which didn't mean much to me at the time, but if I can grab out, translating it, Dear Mr. Renaud, enclosed you will find the data on the Renaud family, which I could find here. Not every gap could be filled. For the work, send me €75 to be made out to one of the adjacent accounts. Best regards from the consistory, Robert Violet. Now, as well as that covering letter, the other thing that was in it was this. And this is actually the original which I brought, because I can't fit this onto the slide. But I opened it out, and it's that. It's a chart with, I think, 105 names on it, starting with my ancestors at the bottom who came to Australia, and at that time that was as far back into my ancestry as I could go, the ones who came to Australia. But if it goes right up the generations to the top to Claude and Judith Louise, the ones who actually came to Germany. Now you can imagine that at the time, not knowing any of this, this was a fantastic thing, and caused me to be inspired to do even further research. And the next slide actually describes where I went from there. Of course, I consulted and joined the Huguenot Society of Australia and got significant advice from Robert Nash. He mentioned a thing called the Bibliothèque Wallonne card indexes, so I consulted that and after weeks of searching found 66 specific references there to family names of mine. I looked at the GeneaNet website. It's a huge worldwide genealogical site based in France, and found the family tree of an Ellen Couvray. And I contacted her. She lives in the Netherlands and made significant discoveries. Her ancestors actually came from the same town in France as mine, and there are some marriages between the two families. So from her extensive database of about 28,000 names, I could add another 3 or 4 generations on top of the family tree, going back to France before they even came to Germany. I contacted Family Search and had microfilm copies of resources sent. I believe that service doesn't exist anymore. They're trying to put their stuff online. I accessed online church book records for French departmental archives, as I've already mentioned. Unfortunately, there are gaps. You know, all the records from those times don't exist. They just survive in bits and pieces, which is unfortunate. I contacted the German Huguenot Society also and received great information from them. And at a conference a year and a half ago, I met a professor from Austria who just happens to have family members in Queensland who are descendants of Huguenots. He said, "Oh, I visit Berlin once a month. You want me to do anything?" And I said, "Yes, go to the church books of Angermünde there and look up a record for me." And which he did, and I'll show you that record in a moment. In fact, it's the next one, I think. Yes. Now, you might say that's a bit hard to read, but this is the first known record for my direct ancestors in Germany, dated 17th of June 1710. It's from the church books of the French Reformed community of Angermünde in the Uckermark, and was supplied to me by my Austrian friend Robert Hyman. From a couple of other sources I already knew the basic information, but seeing the original provided a few more clues. For example, it gives you his occupation, 3 lines down, planteur de tabac. I'll come back to that one. It indicates that his father Claude, fils de Claude Renaud, laboureur au dit Bachos. It indicates that Claude is still living in Bazoches. In other words, he hasn't come to Germany yet, which makes me think that the family didn't all come in one family group. If Philippe's in Germany and his father's still back in France. It says that his wife Marie Malengro, native de Varquigny, près de Mont en Hainaut, a native of Varquigny, Mons in Hainaut. Now, without giving you all the research I did on that, Hainaut at that time was part of the Spanish Netherlands. It wasn't in France. So I'm thinking that her ancestry was actually Walloon rather than French. So I'm making the claim that, as well as French Huguenot ancestry, I have a bit of Walloon ancestry as well, based on that evidence. Interesting that they give the time of the marriage, à 2 heures après midi, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't think you find those. And I find that with even death records as well, they will put the time that the person died, not just the date. Next slide. This is the same information from the Bibliothèque Wallonne card indexes. It's less detailed, as they're only meant to be index cards, and there are a few spelling differences as well. These cards, held at Leiden in the Netherlands, but available online through Family Search, have over 1 million records from French Protestant churches in Belgium, France, Germany and the Netherlands, covering the years 1500 to 1858. Unfortunately, the cards are only in a very rough alphabetical order and are hugely time-consuming to search. But as mentioned, I did find references to 66 family members. Next one. This is the birth and baptismal record for their first child a year later. It tells me exactly where they were living, Volets, about 5 kilometres west of Angermünde, on the lake known as Woletsee. It also calls Philippe a planteur de tabac. So what was that? Next. Yep. Yes, in German, planteur de tabac is Tabakpflanzer, or tobacco planter. And it was one of the industries in which the Huguenots who went to Brandenburg Prussia involved themselves. The Spanish had introduced tobacco to Europeans in 1528, and the French began to cultivate it in 1560. It was initially seen as a virtuous medicinal thing. In 1563, a Swiss doctor, Huguenot, said that it, quote, has a wonderful power of producing a kind of peaceful drunkenness. And in 1571, a Spanish doctor, Morales, claimed that tobacco could cure 36 health problems. Attitudes soon changed. Slide, please. King James I of England, calling tobacco use in 1604 a custom loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, dangerous to the lungs, and in the black stinking fume thereof, nearest resembling the horrible Stygian smoke of the pit that is bottomless. I think he tried to do a lot to prevent the import, tobacco use and culture in England. Now, the colonial list from 1699, referred to earlier, lists in Brandenburg, Prussia, 69 tobacco planters, 18 tobacco traders, and 103 manufacturers or spinners of tobacco. The industry was particularly prevalent around Angermunde and Prenzlau in the Uckermark, and it was an export industry to places like Denmark, Sweden, Poland, Silesia, Bohemia, and the Dutch Republic. Next one. Meanwhile, in April 1714, Philippe's younger brother, Jacques, a menuisier or carpenter, married in Berlin. The record is here, and this was actually found on Ancestry, but here is a word of caution. It's found under the general grouping of Lutheran baptisms, marriages, and burials. And of course it's not Lutheran, it's written in French and is French Reformed. Whether this is an error by Ancestry or just a convenient place to put French Reformed and other Protestant records, I don't know. I'm not going to show you all of the records I found for my German Huguenot ancestors because there are hundreds. As a quick summary, Philippe soon moved from Angermunde to Prenzlau. He and Marie had 9 children, 5 of whom died in infancy. That's not unusual. I've got some worse cases than that. Philippe died in 1747 and Marie's wife in 1754. Jacques and his wife Elizabeth both died in 1736 in Berlin after having 5 children, 2 of whom died in infancy. Philippe and Jacques' mother, Judith Louise, died in Berlin in 1720, but the big mystery for me is when and where their father Claude died, because after about 7 years of searching, I still have not found his death record. Evidence points to his dying somewhere between 1714 and 1720 in Prenzlau or Berlin. Just one more church book record only to show you, and that's the next one. Hard to read, but this is the marriage record from the French Reformed Church of St. Johannes, Prenzlau, for Philippe's son Jacques in 1752 to a Magdalene Varenburg. They are my 5 times great-grandparents. Philippe is described as, if I can read there, ensemble vivant, laboureur et bourgeois audit Prenzlau, meaning while he was alive, laboureur and bourgeois of Prenzlau. Now the term bourgeois is here, I think, equivalent to burgher, a privileged citizen of a town, part of a social class from which town officials could be drawn. This indicates a reasonable status in Prenzlau and a degree of acceptance into the local population. But was this typical across the land? How well were Huguenots accepted? Much has been written. It would seem that at the higher levels of society and in the military, they were well accepted. French culture and language became the fashion, and Huguenots received high appointments. And from this slide here is a convenient example. I've underlined the name of the pastor on this record. At the bottom, a Manasseh Ancien. He was actually a member of a very prominent Huguenot family. The Ancien family. These are some of the main members of the family. And in fact, from my research, there are about 7 members of that family who are all famous in their various fields of expertise. But Charles Ancien is probably the most famous. He was a published author, he was a judge of the French colony in Berlin, head of the Académie des Nobles, which was an educational body. He was the historian or historiographer to the elector. He helped found the Academy of Berlin. His younger brother David Ancien was, as you read, ambassador to London, and he went on some sort of a secret mission to Poland, like a spying mission disguised as an official. I don't know the full story. And it's his son, Manasseh Ancien, who's the minister on the previous record. Okay, next one. There is evidence for a slightly different picture at the level of the ordinary population. While the integration of the Huguenots has been praised as exemplary for centuries, particularly by Huguenot historians such as Erman and Reclam, modern historians are questioning this. To the ordinary German, the appearance, language and religious practices of the newcomers were unfamiliar. The initial compassion of German Berliners turned to hostility. Taxes imposed to assist the refugees met with resistance. There was jealousy of the privileges given to the newcomers. There were cases of arson and stones thrown through windows. Some Lutheran pastors did not share their premises with the French Reformed. The Huguenots preferred to remain among themselves for a long time and concentrate in certain areas. They preferred to marry among themselves for at least the first 3 generations. They often had little command of the German language well into old age. They set up looms in their apartments, causing complaints about too much dirt. It was said that the French were careless about handling fire. Conflicts with the craft guilds occurred. Disputes between long-established artisans and newcomers are recorded. Since being a member of a guild was compulsory in Berlin, Huguenot artisans had to join. But as part of their privileges, the admission fee was waived, and they did not have to produce a masterpiece. As many Huguenots could not produce proof of their qualifications, this caused tensions and resentment too. Huguenot historians attribute these conflicts to jealousy by the locals, envious of the higher technical skills of the Huguenots. Others would say that the guilds were only trying to protect their standards. One historian argues that whoever was right or wrong, the overall number of conflicts was actually comparatively small anyway. Next one. So what did the Huguenots think of their hosts? It's important to note that the Huguenots did not leave France because they were against absolute monarchy. So they were prepared to be very thankful and very loyal to the elector and his heirs. This point is strongly put by early Huguenot writers such as Erman and Reclam, who promoted the concept of the Huguenots as loyal Prussian subjects. They heaped great praise on Frederick William on his death and afterwards. He was their saviour, and they urged their fellow Huguenots to be loyal. They depicted Huguenots as a type of new elite in Germany. Even Otto von Bismarck later called them the best Germans. Well, Jean-Pierre Erman, the Huguenot historian, apparently followed through on his loyalty. When Napoleon's French troops occupied Berlin on the 27th of October 1806, there was a brief conversation between the victorious French emperor and the 71-year-old Erman, who headed a delegation of Berlin clergymen. In this interview, Erman defended the policies of Prussia against Napoleon's accusations and replied to Napoleon's allegation that he was French and should actually welcome the victory of France, saying that he was a loyal subject of the Prussian crown and supporter of the Reformed faith. He could only see Napoleon's presence in this place with great pain. Napoleon is said to have replied after the interview, "Today I met someone who told me the real truth." After these events, Erman, like most Huguenots in Prussia, gave up the use of French, of the French mother tongue, in protest against the French occupation, and used German in the future, quite remarkably, I think I have evidence of the same attitude in my own family. When my great-great-grandfather Abraham Renaud arrived in Queensland in 1884 with his family, he or someone else in his family brought with them a coin, which has come into my possession. Here it is. It is a Siegerstaler, or victory teller, minted in Prussia in 1871 to commemorate the recent victory of Prussia and its allies over France in the Franco-Prussian War. The ring soldered to the edge indicates that it was meant to be worn proudly, no doubt. Ironic perhaps that a family that partially descended from French Huguenots would value it as part of their German heritage. And by the way, I've got the real thing here, which you can have a look at later. Slide, next one. Look, I'm not going through this in any detail at all, but I just want to point out a pattern. The first of my ancestors to arrive in Germany was Philippe, and he married Marie Malengro, French name. Their son Jacques married Madeleine Varambourg, French name. Their son Jacob married Marie Loget, French name, but then it changes. Michel Renaud marries Caroline Rick, German. Abraham marries Wilhelmina Schmidt, German. Look, that's the normal pattern. 3 generations of marrying among themselves and then eventually intermarrying with the German population. Just to complete, young Friedrich came to Australia and married someone of German descent. Then Leslie Renaud married Joyce Fram, someone of German descent. Graham Renaud, my father, married Moore, that's a German name as well. And then you get to me, and I've broken the pattern. I've married someone with straight British, Anglo-British, and on the quiet,
Not German.
what am I saying? Ancestry. I'm trying to say convict ancestry. Trying hard. All right, next slide is, this is just a caution. If you see this picture on the internet, these are not Huguenots going to Berlin, as some websites on the internet listed. In fact, these were people who in 1766 were recruited by the King of Prussia to come from France to help reform the taxation system in Prussia. So they're just simply German immigrants brought to Prussia for a particular purpose, nothing to do with religious refugees. And yet, I mean, it's a wonderful picture. I was going to use it in this presentation until I researched to find out what the picture actually was, and they're not Huguenots. So, you know, be careful in doing your research. Mistakes can be made. Look, the next slide is the very last slide. And to conclude, I've shown you only a fraction of what I've discovered, which is only a fraction of what I'd like to know. I still can't answer some basic questions about my Huguenot ancestors, but hopefully that will come. For example, I've always felt that my ancestors may have initially gone to or via the Dutch Republic, but I haven't yet got round to checking Dutch records, and I don't think that's going to be easy. And finally, time constraints have prevented me from looking at issues such as, what contributions did the Huguenots make to Germany? And did Prussia eventually become a great European power largely because of the Huguenot input? Or how did the Huguenots fare in the various other German states to which they went? I've really only looked at Brandenburg Prussia here, but there were many other states that they went to. Anyway, please look at the handouts you've got. There may be something of value to you. Please look at the table of resources here, not something there. The family tree I did up is there as well, if you want to look at that. I guess at this stage it's just, are there any questions? Obviously we've gone probably well over time here, but the difficulties have perhaps helped to contribute to that. Happy to answer any questions, but or if you haven't got any right now, at the bottom of the handouts I've actually put my email address, so if you think of anything, just shoot me an email and I'll do my best to help. Thank you. Is there anybody
who's got a question at this stage?
All I can say is every time I thought of a question, he answered it before I finished.
So he's a good presenter.
Well, I want to say to you that Neil showed wonderful characteristics. The first is that he persevered. We have never had audio challenges like we had today. And to have those on top of the usual challenges that Gerard is slowly getting on top of the audio, I think showed enormous perseverance. And I think we want to say well done to you, Neil. Thank you very much indeed for persevering. The other thing is that there was so much wonderful information in here. I noted down the origins of tobacco, and both the benefits of it that some people saw, and was it King James who saw it as being something else. Wonderful sidelines, and I think that's all part of a rounded researcher who's a librarian by profession and also a history teacher. We have been very fortunate this afternoon to have all of that information together. So I want to say thank you very much indeed, Neil. Let's give them.
Huguenots and descendants of Huguenots are used to handling hardships.
Well, that may be true too. I've noted down here that tobacco was regarded as for peaceful drunkenness.